Hello my dear friends, this is your friend Dark Fox 3.0 and we are back with a new fanfic. What if Naruto lived with Tayuya and built a powerful harem around her? Naruto times Tayuya, Part 1. End no start the fanfic. Konoha. 4 years after the Kyuubi attacked. Today was an unusual day in Konoha. It was officially a day of mourning, but it was also the birthday of one particularly unusual boy. The boy in question had been born on the evening of the Kyuubi attack and was the reason that humans still roamed the earth. However, people made an incorrect assumption due to their need of a scapegoat for the loss of their loved ones that the child was the demon reborn, and not the one who kept it at bay. The villagers took particular relish on beating this child on the 10th of October, his birthday. This year was no different. The child stumbled through the streets, cut and bleeding profusely from wounds made by broken bottles and other sharp implements. He looked over his shoulder to see the regular mob charging after him, drunken grins on their faces. Naruto stumbled down a side alley, his mind no longer able to work. Unfortunately, the alley was a dead end. Naruto backed himself up against the wall as the mob blocked off the entrance with a smile of someone who knows for sure they have won a fight. The man in front stepped forward, gloating over his target. I think it's about time we finished what Yondaime started, boys. The drunks either cheered their approval or smirked. They moved in and began beating the child with a sick sense of pleasure gained from getting revenge on the thing closest to what caused them so much grief. On top of that building, a man with brown hair and black shades stared down at the scene. He was supposed to meet up with his team, but this was something you don't see every day. Akado Yoroi glared at the men. What could they possibly have against a 4-year-old child? Yoroi may not be the most caring person, but this went too far for even him. He was about to jump down there and disperse them when his teammates, Yukushi Kabuto and Tsurugi Masumi, came up on either side of him. Yoroi, where the hell? They both noticed the scene below them and their eyes narrowed. Kabuto smiled and pushed his glasses back up his nose. Shall we? They both nodded and jumped down with their leader. The drunks may not be ninja, but they didn't need training to know when the sun was suddenly blocked that meant something was overhead. They looked up to see 3 figures jumping down. Most of them got out of the way, but one of them wasn't quick enough and they landed on him. Yoroi activated his chakra drainer while Kabuto activated his dual chakra scalpels. Kabuto smiled sweetly at them. Mind explaining what you're doing attacking this child? Surely you don't need a mob this size to take care of a 4-year-old child. The leader of the mob sneered. Do you even know what that thing is? Kabuto looked at the boy and then back at the man. Yes, I do actually. He's human. The fact that he can't use chakra to defend himself would also indicate that. Now, unless you want to be charged with attacking shinobi of the village as well, I suggest you remove yourselves from the general vicinity before we decide to call for Anbu reinforcements. The group mumbled but began to shuffle off. The second they began to disperse, Kabuto turned around to inspect the boy with a slight smile touching his lips. Orochimaru-sama may find a use for this boy. Kabuto felt for a pulse. It was erratic, but it was present. He began healing the more major wounds and his eyes narrowed as the wounds began healing faster than they should. Must be the demonic chakra, interesting. In the end, Kabuto only had to use half the chakra he thought he would and the boy looked weakly up at him. Kabuto smiled at him in his regular cheesy fashion. Are you alright? The boy nodded slightly. Naruto vaguely recognized 2 people stepping up beside him and a conversation began. Is the kid alright? Kabuto nodded. His wounds were healing twice as fast as they should have. The other 2 nodded and looked at the kid. Kabuto took out a soldier pill and a blood replenishment pill and gave them to Naruto. Eat these. They're bitter, but they'll help a lot. Naruto nodded and bit down on them. They were indeed bitter, but he swallowed them and was amazed to find strength returning to him instantly. He slowly sat up and looked at his three saviors. Why did you save me? All the villagers hate me. Kabuto smiled as he pushed his glasses back up his nose. We're not your average villagers. Naruto nodded slowly and Kabuto sighed. You look like you haven't been fed in days. To illustrate his point, Naruto's stomach growled. Naruto blushed in embarrassment while Kabuto stood up and held a hand out to Naruto. How about we go get you something to eat? Want anything in particular? Naruto's eyes lit up at the mention of food. Ramen. Kabuto chuckled while the other two smirked. Kabuto looked at the other two. Can you go and tell Sensei I've got something to do and I'll be there soon? They both nodded and leapt up and out of the alleyway. Naruto looked at them in shock. How did they do that? Kabuto smiled as Naruto took his hand and followed him out of the alleyway towards the nearest ramen stand. 5 minutes later, Kabuto spotted a rather run-down ramen stand and decided it was good enough. He stepped inside and the man in his mid-40s behind the counter looked at them. Can I help you? Kabuto smiled mentally. No wonder he didn't have much business with that attitude. Could I get a bowl of miso pork ramen please? The man nodded as Kabuto turned to Naruto. Which one would you like? Naruto looked dumbfounded for a second. No one had ever given him a choice in anything before. Anyo, the same thing as you, please. The man nodded and started preparing the ramen while Kabuto turned to Naruto. He secretly cast a small genjutsu around them that made them look like they were chatting about various things to others to mask their true talk. Naruto, not having any skill in genjutsu, was none the wiser. Naruto, does anyone in this village even care for you? Naruto thought about it. Did anyone? Well, apart from that old man in the white robes, no. Well, there's that old man in the white robes with the funny hat. Kabuto sighed. The Sandaime Hokage. Are you sure he really cares about you? Or is he just doing it out of pity? The question struck Naruto. Why would he care but no one else? Kabuto sighed at the look on Naruto's face. Naruto, I doubt he actually feels anything for you. A Hokage is ideally supposed to love every single person in a village. It almost seems like he's doing it because he has to. Naruto's eyes widened as tears threatened to spill from his eyes. Kabuto smiled and put a hand on his shoulder. Time to move in for the kill. I know a place where you would be accepted as normal, where you wouldn't be hunted for any reason and where you could have real friends your own age. Naruto's eyes widened. That place was the place of his dreams. A place he thought couldn't possibly exist. It's full of kids who've lived just like you. They know what it's like, so they don't pick on each other. Naruto's eyes widened. Where? Kabuto smirked slightly. Hook, line and sinker. It's not too far from here, about 5 days walk, 3 days if we move fast. Naruto's brain may be gullible, but he knew when something was up. At that point, the man served their ramen and Kabuto warped the genjutsu so that both of them thanked the man, which they actually did, but the genjutsu would have prevented them from saying it. Naruto-kun, ninja have to leave their villages from time to time, even if it's only for a few weeks to complete a mission. However, there are some of them who leave because they don't like the way their village treats them. The place I'm talking about is run by one of those people, and he was from Konoha too. Konoha has and will continue to produce a number of very powerful people who dislike the way the village is run. Kabuto was of course referring to people such as Orochimaru and the Uchiha clan, whose situation was reaching boiling point. It wouldn't be long before the clan entered civil war and destroyed itself. Naruto looked up as he finished the last lot of noodles in the bowl and began drinking the soup. So these people were treated badly as well. Kabuto smiled and nodded. Yes. However, they were treated poorly for a reason different than you. Most of they were so powerful and smart that people began to fear them and eventually started accusing them of things they didn't do. The man I work for was one of the first to leave. Naruto's eyes widened. So you're not from this village? Kabuto smiled and nodded. No, I'm what's called a spy. I was originally from this village, however, I left after something similar to what's happening to you happened to me. If it makes you feel better, Konoha has more spies in other countries than all of them combined. Naruto's eyes widened as Kabuto continued explaining. Konoha isn't such a great place. It is if you're average, but for people like us who aren't normal, it's the worst place we could possibly live. The place I'm talking about, everyone's unusual, so they won't think less of you. Naruto's eyes widened. He'd made up his mind. I want to go there. Kabuto smiled. You had your chance to raise a weapon that no one could defeat, Konoha. You threw it aside like trash. You'll regret that. Kabuto paid for their meal and stood up, dispelling the genjutsu when the old man wasn't looking. Do you have any personal possessions, Naruto-kun? Naruto shook his head. Everything he'd tried to keep, the kids or the workers of the orphanage had taken it away. Kabuto smiled. Let's get going then. Naruto nodded and followed Kabuto towards the west gate. Once they were almost there, Kabuto did a small area sleeping genjutsu on the guards to put them to sleep. They walked out of gate and into the surrounding bush, heading almost directly north. 4 days later, Kabuto led a very weary Naruto up to a set of stairs that led underground in the middle of nowhere. Above the doorway, there was a pair of engraved snakes entwined around each other, both of them staring out at anyone who dared to enter. Kabuto led Naruto down the stairs and through the door, heading down a long spiral staircase lit only by candles. They arrived at a junction with 3 paths to choose from, however, Kabuto took none of them. He walked up to the left side of the wall and touched a nondescript part of the wall, which moved back under his touch. The section of the wall slid down into the floor and Kabuto motioned Naruto to follow him inside. Naruto looked at the other doors and then back at Kabuto. Kabuto-san, why didn't we take those doors? Kabuto smiled at Naruto. You'll find out someday. Naruto nodded as Kabuto led him into an area that had people in it. Naruto had not seen another person since they left Konoha. Naruto tried to get closer to Kabuto. However, most people gave him a short glance of mild interest and then went about whatever they were doing. No one tried to attack him, and no one glared at him and no one called him names. Kabuto had been telling the truth. Kabuto turned to Naruto. The man you are about to meet has a short temper and is quick to lash out at people. It would be wise to address him as Orochimaru-sama. Naruto nodded as he was led through doorways to a room that was guarded by 2 nins who wore what looked to be full-face masks that only revealed their eyes. Both of them bowed slightly to Kabuto. Kabuto-san, Orochimaru-sama was not expecting you back for quite some time. Kabuto smiled at the man and pushed his glasses back up his nose. I found someone he will definitely want to meet. The man nodded and looked at Naruto before knocking on the door. Naruto heard a faint rasping voice from within. What? The man was obviously nervous as he spoke. Orochimaru-sama, Kabuto-san is requesting audience. Naruto could have sworn he heard a slight chuckle from inside. Come in. The man nodded to Kabuto who pushed open the door and led Naruto into a very dark room lit by a single candle. Naruto saw there were jars filled with liquids and all descriptions of animals, most of them being snakes. However, the light from the candle caught something in the middle of the room which caught Naruto's attention. It was a man with pure white skin, long black hair and piercing golden eyes. The man smiled at Kabuto. Kabuto, what is the meaning of this? Kabuto smiled at Orochimaru. Orochimaru-sama, I came back with something that I believe would benefit you greatly. Orochimaru looked at Naruto and his eyes widened in recognition before he smiled sinisterly. Ah, if it isn't Naruto-kun, tell me, Naruto-kun, what did you hope to gain by coming here? Naruto gulped. He could tell that there was a lot riding on this question. Anyo, I want to be accepted and get strong, Orochimaru-sama. Orochimaru smirked. Couldn't you get that back in Konoha? Naruto's eyes narrowed for a second as he remembered all of the memories of the beatings before he regained his senses. Orochimaru smiled. Kabuto had indeed brought him a powerful weapon. No, Orochimaru-sama, they beat me up and called me names. Orochimaru beckoned Naruto to come over to him, which he did with uncertainty. If you serve me, I can give you power beyond your imagination. If you serve me well, I will recognize you. What is your answer? Naruto's eyes lit up at the prospect. Hell, he'd practically be willing to dance in public for recognition and power. All he had to do was serve this man and not fail him. This was too good to be true. I'll do it, Orochimaru-sama. Orochimaru smiled and chuckled darkly. He turned to Kabuto. Kabuto, get Naruto-kun some decent clothes and introduce him to the others. Kabuto nodded. Hi, Orochimaru-sama. Naruto bowed deeply to Orochimaru and then left to follow Kabuto. A figure stepped out of the darkness behind Orochimaru. Orochimaru-sama, I sensed a great evil coming from that boy. Orochimaru smiled darkly. He does contain a great evil, Kimimaro. He is the most powerful Jinchuriki, the container for the Kyuubi no Kitsune. The boy behind him eyes widened dramatically. Orochimaru smiled. However, Akatsuki will eventually find out about him. It will be troublesome when they do. Kimimaro nodded and stepped back into the shadows, leaving his master to ponder about what to do with this boy. 5 minutes later, Kabuto led Naruto to a small room and opened the door. Inside were stacks and stacks of clothes, towels, sheets and other types of cloth goods. Kabuto walked up to a particular one and picked off the one on top. It was a mainly white cloth robe that had a yin and yang symbol on the front. Kabuto handed it to Naruto. It looked incredibly corny, but if this is what he needed to wear to get recognition and power, it was a small price to pay. Kabuto looked at Naruto as he handed him a towel. Don't put it on yet. You need to get cleaned up. Naruto looked at himself. He'd have to admit, he did look pretty dirty. Kabuto led Naruto out of the room and down what to him seemed like endless dark corridors before stopping outside a room. Kabuto opened it to reveal an empty room with a bed, a chest of drawers, a bedside table and a small writing table. Kabuto looked at Naruto. This will be your room. You will have to stay here unless you are required to be somewhere else. I'll let the others explain the rules to you. Naruto nodded slowly as Kabuto closed the door. Kabuto smiled at the worried look on Naruto's face. The other 4 live right next to you. They know the way, so just ask them. Naruto looked at Kabuto questioningly as they walked down the barely lit hall. Other 4. Kabuto nodded and smiled as he pushed his glasses back up his nose. There are 4 other people your age which Orochimaru-sama has special plans for. Naruto nodded. Special plans sounded promising. Kabuto led Naruto to a pair of doors that had a stick figure of a male on one and a female on the other. Kabuto indicated to the mail room. Go inside and get cleaned up. Once you finish, put your new clothes on. I'll wait here for you. Naruto nodded and pushed open the door to reveal a completely white room that had part of one wall covered in a urinal, about 6 stalls for toilets, a row of basins, and then at the back was a block. Naruto went up to the back wall and dumped his stuff on a bench. Looking inside the block, he saw what appeared to be individual stalls. He went inside and opened one to reveal a shower. He shrugged and stripped before dumping his rather tatty clothes back with his other stuff. He took his towel and went into a shower stall, turning the taps on until he found the right temperature. It was kind of hard to turn the taps properly, due to his rather short stature. However, he eventually achieved it and washed himself with the bar of soap and the small bottle of shampoo there. He had a 3-minute shower, scared that if he took any longer, Kabuto would get angry with him. Once he had finished, he turned off the water and took his towel from the door handle and began drying himself. Naruto walked out of the stall and put his new robes on. Naruto took his old clothes with him and his towel and exited the room. Kabuto smiled at him. That was rather quick, Naruto-kun. Are you sure you were able to wash yourself properly? Naruto stared at Kabuto in blank incomprehension. He thought he didn't have a long enough shower. Back at the orphanage, he was lucky to get a 1-minute shower. Kabuto sighed and pushed his glasses back up his nose. Naruto-kun, we do things very differently here. Everyone was shunned by their villages, so we understand what it's like. Some are the last of their clans, some of them never had a family, and some families kicked them out at a young age. We've all lived hard lives. Naruto nodded slowly. Kabuto pushed himself off the wall and motioned Naruto to follow him. Kabuto led Naruto down a few more corridors before he opened what to Naruto seemed like a random door. When the door opened, Naruto saw that the room had children his own age in it. However, some of the children were not exactly normal. There were 4 children in this room. One was a hulking boy for his age, another had 2 heads while another had 6 arms. Kabuto walked over to the man who was obviously in charge and exchanged a few quick words with him. The man nodded several times and then looked at Naruto. I understand. Kabuto pushed his glasses back up his nose and smiled. I'll leave him with you then. The man nodded and Kabuto turned back to Naruto. Naruto-kun, you will be training here for the next few years. If you need anything, just ask that man there. Naruto nodded and Kabuto left the room. The man in charge looked at Naruto. Okay, I need to know why Orochimaru-sama has upgraded you straight to the elite class. What can you do? Naruto thought about it. What could he do? The instructor raised an eyebrow. He wouldn't have upgraded you here for no reason. Naruto thought back to the past. Well, whenever I get hurt, it heals really quickly by itself. The man's eyes narrowed as did the others in the room. The man looked at Naruto, or more specifically, his cheeks. When was your birthday? Naruto's head lowered. October 10th. The man's eyes widened. I see. No wonder he sent you here. The redhead in the class called out to him. He looks like an ordinary kid. What's his birthday got to do with anything? The man looked up at the redhead. He's a Jinchuriki, or more correctly, the most powerful one. The other 4's eyes widened before they smiled. The one with 6 arms came up to him and extended a hand. I've always wanted to meet a Jinchuriki. I'm Kidomaru. Naruto gingerly took his hand and shook it. Naruto, what's a Jinchuriki? Everyone in the room face faulted. The redhead recovered first and went into a verbal lashing. What the hell do you mean, what's a Jinchuriki? You've lived for how long and you don't know what you are? You're a complete idiot. Naruto shrunk back while Kidomaru smirked. Don't mind Tayuya. She swears a lot. Naruto looked up at the red head in disbelief. That's a girl. I thought it was a guy. The temperature in the room dropped several degrees before Tayuya launched herself at Naruto. What did you say, you piece of shit? I'm going to break your goddamn neck for that. Tayuya bowled Naruto over, whose arms shot out for the nearest things to stabilize himself. Unfortunately, that happened to be Tayuya's robes and she went tumbling to the ground with him. When they stopped, the others in the room smirked at their position. Tayuya was practically straddling Naruto, who looked up at her in fear. The boy with two heads spoke for the others. He's only just walked in and you're already getting intimate with him, Tayuya. The others laughed as Tayuya and Naruto blushed. Tayuya quickly jumped off Naruto and stared at Sakin. What did you say, you two-headed freak? Sakin laughed as Tayuya rushed him and they both engaged in a scuffle, Tayuya swearing enough to make even the instructor cringe. Naruto got back up and looked at them. I suppose I could get used to this. The others introduced themselves quick enough. Tayuya was the only one who was still cold to him, but them again, she seemed cold to everyone. The instructor got them back into form quickly and continued the lecture on whatever it was he was talking about. Naruto vaguely understood it had something to do with genjutsu, whatever that was. Beyond that, he had no clue. By the middle of the day, he dismissed them and walked out. The others grabbed the few things they had and left. The larger boy looked at Naruto. You coming? We're getting something to eat. You don't need anything to eat, fat ass. Jirobu looked at Tayuya in an annoyed fashion. Tayuya, women shouldn't talk like that. Tayuya ignored it and kept walking as Naruto pulled up beside Jirobu. Why does she swear so much? Jirobu sighed. Apparently, she's had a really hard past. More than the three of us. She just swears to cover her weaknesses. Jirobu didn't get to finish the sentence as something stuck him in the head. Tayuya stared at him. I do not, fat ass. Sakin smirked. Then why do you swear, Tayuya stared at Sakin. What's it to you, piece of shit? Sakin smirked and continued walking. Naruto walked up to Tayuya and looked at the ground. Sorry about before. Tayuya raised an eyebrow. What's with you? I thought being a demon container would give you some balls. Naruto visibly flinched at the mention of the word demon, which was noticed by the other three. Kidomaru looked at Tayuya. That was insensitive, even for you. I'd be willing to bet he had a worse life than you did. Tayuya stared at Kidomaru and then back at Naruto. Her stare softened a bit before she mumbled something and turned around to head to the cafeteria. The other three watched her retreating back. Jirobu looked the most shocked. Wow, I think that's the first time she ever apologized. The other two nodded in agreement. Naruto looked up, his eyes devoid of emotion. All three of them noticed it and shrugged. Kidomaru put a hand on Naruto's shoulder. You'll get used to that. Anyway, let's get something to eat. Naruto nodded and followed them down several corridors to a set of doors that people seemed to be constantly going in and out of. They pushed open the doors to reveal the cafeteria. There were people of all ages sitting at long benches eating food from trays. Naruto followed the three boys to find Tayuya swearing at the chef serving her food. Naruto and the other three lined up and eventually they were given a tray each. On it was some sort of soup, some pastries and some vegetables. They moved to the table Tayuya had sat at and began eating. No one said anything as they ate. After they had finished, they stood up and dumped their trays in the stack with the others, leaving to go for their afternoon lesson, according to the others. Naruto quickened his pace to walk beside Sakin. Sakin looked at him in slight interest. Anyo, I have no idea what they're talking about in class. Sakin, Tayuya, Jirobu and Kidumaru's sweat dropped. Tayuya spun around and glared at Naruto. Do you have any training at all? Naruto shook his head. The old man was about to put me into first-year academy when Kabuto-san brought me here. Jirobu looked at Naruto quizzically. Old man. Naruto looked at him as he explained. People called him Hokage-sama. The others scoffed. Naruto looked at them. What's wrong? Sakin smiled with a glint in his eye. Orochimaru-sama was the old man's student, apparently. Just some advice, but don't talk about him in front of others. Orochimaru-sama doesn't exactly like him. Tayuya smirked. No kidding. Kidumaru sighed as he pulled out a book and handed it to Naruto, which he took. Read that. Most of us only just started lessons here, but we've known each other for about half a year. At the start, all of us were given that. It'll teach you the basics on chakra and chakra control. Naruto nodded and pocketed the book. Out of the four here, Jirobu and Kidumaru seemed to be the friendliest of the four. Sakin seemed to try and exert dominance over the group while Tayuya seemed to lash out at others at the first sign of an argument. It was an odd group, but Naruto could get used to it. Hell, they didn't beat the crap out of him for being a demon container, whatever that was, so it was a start. They entered the classroom to find another instructor there and they began their lesson. 3 weeks later, Naruto had opened the book the moment he got back to his room. After some slight trouble with some jargon like mental energy and chakra pathways, the book was actually fairly easy to understand. Naruto had never been allowed into the library, let alone borrow a book, so he absorbed the information hungrily. By the end of the first week with the others, he was able to understand some lessons. The others looked shocked at this. Most of them had taken a month or so to get to the level they were at now, while Naruto was able to understand about half of the lessons in a week. Naruto's submissive attitude soon turned to one of friendliness and trust in the others. The others had immediately taken to Naruto. Tayuya was still rather brash, but like Kidumaru had said, he'd gotten used to it. They soon found he was an excellent sparring partner as he tended to be able to make up strategies that shouldn't work but did on the spot. Naruto's tactics tended more towards fooling the opponent and giving them a few fast, powerful strikes when they weren't expecting it. By the end of the third week, Naruto had practically caught up to the others. It was on the third week that a Junin interrupted their class and had a few quick words with the instructor. He nodded and looked up at Jirobu. Jirobu, Orochimaru-sama requests your presence. Jirobu nodded and got up. The others thought nothing of it as Jirobu left with the man who had interrupted and the other four continued their studies. By the end of the lesson, Jirobu had not come back, so the others were getting worried. What is that fat piece of shit doing? Naruto shrugged. Who knows? They walked past Jirobu's room when they felt a rather evil spike of chakra coming from within. They opened the door to see Jirobu lying on his bed, sweating and hyperventilating. What was most worrying though was the aura of purple chakra exploding off him. Jirobu slowly got up and the others looked at him in shock. His face and arms were covered in lines of black triangles. He looked at them with a grin on his face. Don't worry guys, I'm fine. Better yet, Jirobu cracked his knuckles and playfully punched the wall, making it buckle and shatter under his palm. I feel great. Naruto's eyes widened. Jirobu, what happened to you? Jirobu looked at Naruto. Orochimaru-sama gave me a rather interesting gift. I'm not sure how it works, but it takes my chakra and multiplies it tenfold. The lines on Jirobu's body flashed red, orange and retreated back to what appeared to be 3 triangles on the base of his neck. Jirobu wobbled unsteadily before falling back on his bed. Tayuya smirked. What kind of a gift makes you that tired after a burst of chakra like that, fatass? Jirobu clearly didn't have the energy to correct his female companion on her choice of words as he just lay there, panting. Naruto smiled. At least you're okay. Get some rest. We'll see you tomorrow. Jirobu sighed and looked at the ceiling. Sure. They closed the door to his room and left for their own. All of them were happy that Jirobu was okay, even if they didn't show it. Naruto walked beside Tayuya. Their rooms were the closest to the end. Naruto smiled at Tayuya. I know you care about Jirobu too. That earned him a whack over the head with a book. Shut it, fox boy. Naruto smiled as Tayuya opened the door to her room and stepped inside. Although most people would think she was just a foul-mouthed girl who hated everyone, Naruto had quickly learnt that she had adopted a version of the kill before you're killed attitude. Naruto had once seen what was under her strange headpiece when Kidomaru had made a ball out of the golden substance he could produce from his body and lobbed it at her from behind, knocking it off. She had what appeared to be a bunch of small horns that were barely visible in her fiery red hair. She had obviously been tormented about them as a child, most likely being called demon, and the like. It seemed she had adopted the motto she had now and enjoyed hurting regular people who decided to gang up on her. She also seemed to have a surprising knack for genjutsu even as a child, managing to make the mobs clutch their heads in agony with a simple whistle. However, those she cared about she gave a single nickname and never used her genjutsu on. Jirobu was always referred to a fatass, Sakin as two-headed freak, Kidomaru as octopus, and Naruto as fox boy. Naruto went into his own room and stripped down before getting a change of boxer shorts and getting into bed. Tayuya wasn't that bad a person. In fact, he thought more of girls who didn't spend their time mooning over a single guy like some of the few female ninjas here did instead of doing what they were supposed to do. With that thought, Naruto rolled over and drifted off to sleep. A year later, over the course of the next year, their lessons had steered towards barriers and fuinjutsu. All of them picked it up readily, but Naruto lapped it up. Out of all of them, he seemed to have more potential for fuinjutsu than any of them. At various times throughout the year, they were called one by one to see Orochimaru. The next day, each of them was found in their rooms with some form of gift from Orochimaru. Near the end of Naruto's first year at the Sound, he was the only one who still hadn't been called. In a way, he felt despondent. The others had said that Orochimaru had bitten them and the pain had been horrible, but that only lasted until they fell unconscious. When they woke up, they felt great. At the end of the first year, Naruto was finally called. He was both excited and worried at the same time. When he was brought before Orochimaru, he found out why. Naruto-kun, finding a seal that would work best for you was extremely troublesome, but I believe I have one that would suit you perfectly. Naruto nodded, ready for anything, or so he thought. Orochimaru led of an aura of killing intent that paralyzed Naruto while Orochimaru formed a hubby seal and his neck extended, snaking its way towards Naruto and bit down on the base of his neck. Pain flooded through Naruto's body as he felt an injection of some form of fluid and his vision blanked out in pain. He fell to his knees, grasping his neck, trying desperately not to cry out in pain. His neck burned like it was literally on fire. Naruto was not able to see, but around his navel, 3 black commas that looked like flames were appearing on his skin in much the same way as ink would appear on a sheet of paper if the other side was saturated in it. Naruto fell to the floor, still gritting his teeth from the pain. He was reaching his limits as he rolled around several times and then curled up into a fetal position and passed out from the pain. Orochimaru's eyebrows rose. My, what a strong will. He didn't cry out in pain once. The effects of the demon seal will be interesting indeed. Orochimaru snapped his fingers and an Oto Junin came in. Seeing the boy on the floor, he nodded and bowed before picking him up and taking him to the medical facility for inspection by Kabuto. Next day, the other four were walking back from their class when they felt a massive spike of chakra coming from somewhere near their rooms. They ran around the corner just in time to see the door to Naruto's room fly off its hinges and an explosion of jet black chakra fly out of it. The others shrank back as the chakra washed over them. It died down slightly and they looked to see a clawed hand with lines of black flames along it grip the doorframe. The owner of the hand revealed themselves and they saw Naruto. Or what could have been Naruto. His eyes were now blood red and slitted. He also had fangs and his whisker marks had elongated. His hair was now unruly. Naruto grinned in an extremely feral manner at them. Hey guys. They raised an eyebrow at Naruto's voice. It held an extremely guttural sound to it, much like a beast would have if it could talk. Naruto opened and closed his hand before he smiled and threw a punch up the hall. Chakra exploded off his hand and rocketed down the hall, creating a miniature gale. Naruto grinned. This is great, I've never had so much power. Naruto did another wind-powered punch and then disappeared, reappearing behind them, much to the shock of the four. Or speed. The others had only been able to keep their cursed seals active for about a minute at most once they had gotten used to it. However, Naruto had surpassed the time that the other four had when they first woke up. Naruto had more speed than Sasuke and more power than Jirobu. Apart from the obvious patterns of the seals, they had no other changes to their physical appearances. Orochimaru took that time to walk around the corner. He chuckled as he surveyed the damage. My, I didn't expect the effects of the demon seal on the Kyuubi's chakra to be this apparent. Orochimaru looked at the door that Naruto had blown off his hinges to indicate his point. Naruto's body, being as young as it was unable to use more of the Kyuubi's converted chakra without seriously damaging itself. As such, the black chakra died down and the black flame tattoos across his body retreated back to his stomach. Naruto fell unceremoniously onto his rear end and looked somewhat surprised. Jirobu and Kidomaru checked up on Naruto to see that he was fine. Orochimaru walked up to Naruto and smiled. How was it, Naruto-kun? Naruto smiled widely. It was great, Orochimaru-sama. I don't remember much of it, but I do remember feeling really powerful. Orochimaru snickered. Is that so? Orochimaru turned to all five of them. I have high expectations for the five of you. Don't let me down. The five of them nodded. Hi, Orochimaru-sama. Orochimaru smirked and turned to leave the five of them standing there in awe of what had just transpired. The end of the month. At the end of that month, they were given a practical assessment by several instructors. The first test was a taijutsu test. Each of the five had to land a single hit on a Junin while he was attacking them. Cursed seals were allowed. The instructor looked up at Jirobu. You're first, Jirobu. Jirobu got up and stepped in front of the others, taking his stance. The Junin told him to go when ready. Jirobu charged forward and the Junin disappeared, reappearing behind him and giving him a palm to the back of the head before reappearing behind him once he turned around to see what had hit him. Jirobu wasn't exactly the fastest one of the group, as he relied on power more than anything. Jirobu sighed and activated his cursed seal, gaining slightly more speed and a lot more power. Jirobu punched the ground in front of him and sent chakra through the ground towards the Junin that resulted in a wall of spikes heading directly for him. He jumped out of the way as the earthen spikes impaled the air he was in less than a second ago, only to find Jirobu next to him. The man was shocked and unable to react due to the fact he was still in midair when Jirobu gave him a punch to the gut, making the Junin double over. Jirobu's seal returned to normal and the Junin coughed as he tried to regain his breath. He nodded at Jirobu. That's fine. Jirobu nodded and walked back to the others. The Junin shook his head in disbelief. If a kid that age could land a punch like that with only the first level, he'd hate to see him when he released level 2. He straightened and motioned them forward, one by one. Each of them noticed that the Junin was going hard on them until they released their seals, at which point he seemed to slacken slightly. Almost as if the aim of this assessment was not to test their abilities, but their seals. After they passed their taijutsu test, they were subjected to a nin and genjutsu test. After they finished the last one, the Junin nodded and handed them a purple rope sash each. They looked at it with disdain. They'd seen Orochimaru wearing one, as well as that white-haired freak called Kimimaro, but all of them agreed it looked incredibly tacky. Tayuya looked at the Junin. What the hell is this? The Junin's sweat dropped. It's a sash. I know that, you piece of shit, but the hell you're going to see me wearing this. They heard a chucking at the door and turned to see Orochimaru standing in the doorway, cast in shadow. He walked in, smiling at them as he held his hands out in front like a mother would to her children when she diffused a situation. Don't say that, Tayuya-chan. It's a sign that you're one of Odo's elite. Tayuya huffed and Naruto looked at Orochimaru. Orochimaru-sama, couldn't we wear something less boring? The others smirked, excluding the Junin whose sweat dropped while Orochimaru chuckled. My, that was rather blunt, Naruto-kun. I had planned on giving you each something special when I came, but it seems that you don't want. Orochimaru didn't get to finish his sentence as the other's sweat dropped. Naruto had put the sash on 3/4 of the way through the sentence and was looking eagerly at Orochimaru. Tayuya whacked him over the head with her genjutsu flute she had acquired recently. You're an idiot. Naruto smiled at her while the others followed suit and put their sashes on, much to Orochimaru's pleasure. He turned back around, smiling widely. Seems you do want to be one of Odo's elites after all. Very well, come with me. I will allow you access to my library of jutsus. You may choose 2 each. They followed Orochimaru eagerly towards a very well-protected room that contained the library of jutsu scrolls. Orochimaru smiled at them. The last room is off-limits. However, you may choose from the rest. The children smiled widely as they looked at the rows and rows of scrolls. There had to be thousands of jutsus here. Most of them went straight past the lower-level jutsus and straight to the A and S ranked jutsus. Orochimaru smiled. So predictable. Naruto stopped at the rack of kinjutsu and browsed the contents. Tayuya called out to them. Hey, Octopus. I think there's one here that would suit you. Kidomaru looked up from the rows of scrolls he was looking at and copped the scroll in the face. Naruto smirked as Kidomaru looked at the scroll and his eyes lit up. Spider summons. Kidomaru smiled. Tayuya was right. This did suit him. He pocketed the scroll and went looking for his last one. The others went back to searching for theirs. Naruto saw one of interest. He opened it, read the description and smiled. He took it and walked over to Tayuya. Hey, Tayuya, this one would suit you. Tayuya looked at the scroll and then booted Naruto into a rack of scrolls. What the hell do you mean? This would suit me. Idiot. Naruto got up clutching his head. Read it. Tayuya opened the scroll and began smiling. It was a demon summoning contract that required sound to control the demons. Naruto looked on the ground to see a rather interesting scroll. Bending down, he picked it up. Rasengan. The others looked at him as he opened the scroll and began reading it. A swirling mass of chakra capable of blowing someone through several walls and ripping their abdomen to pieces as well. He was definitely going to take this one. By the end, everyone had 2 jutsus except Naruto, who still had 1. There wasn't anything he thought would actually suit him. The others were looking at him in an annoyed fashion. Oi, Fox boy, what the hell's taking so long? I can't find another good one. The 5 of them standing at the door sweat dropped. Out of the 4,000 or so jutsus here, he couldn't find 2 good ones. Orochimaru smiled as he stepped inside, thinking up a rather devious idea. Naruto-kun, I may have a special one that you might like. Naruto followed Orochimaru to the back section and opened the door. Inside were jutsus like Edo Tensei, Cursed Seal, and other highly forbidden jutsus. Orochimaru stopped in front of one and pulled it off the rack. Hiraishin no Jutsu. Orochimaru smiled. Indeed. It was a jutsu exclusive to Yondaime. However, I managed to borrow the scroll and one of the implements used to perform it. It wouldn't be too hard to explain having the yellow flash reborn. He had performed experiments with Shadaime's cells that he had gained through Edo Tensei in an attempt to clone him. He'd recently heard of a Tokubetsu Junin in Konoha who could use Mokudan jutsus. Orochimaru had a suspicion that one of his many subjects survived while the others died from their own DNA rejecting the foreign DNA of the Shadaime. Naruto took the scroll and the 3-tipped kunai. Naruto smiled at his sensei and leader. Thanks, Orochimaru-sama. Orochimaru smiled at Naruto. No problems, Naruto-kun. Orochimaru led Naruto out of the room and resealed the door behind them. He began thinking over the implications of giving Naruto these 2 jutsus. If he played his cards right, he may be able to get the entire populace of Konoha to bend to his will simply by getting Naruto a slight change in clothing and speak a few choice words to them. Oh yes, life was indeed good. He chuckled at the thoughts, restraining from full-blown maniacal laughter as they walked out of the jutsu room. Orochimaru turned and smiled at them. From now on, you 5 will be my personal bodyguards. I have rather large plans for all of you, especially you, Naruto-kun. Everyone looked at Naruto, who raised both eyebrows in shock. Me, Orochimaru-sama. Orochimaru smiled as the thoughts of exactly what Naruto was going to be doing to the populace of Konoha in just over half a decade's time. Yes, Naruto-kun. You will see what I have in mind for you soon enough. Naruto nodded. Hi, Orochimaru-sama. However, soon enough was open to interpretation. Soon enough for someone who could technically live forever maybe in the next decade, while soon enough for someone who might not live to be 20 could mean in the next few days. It was all based on personal opinion and experience. Orochimaru broke out of his musings and looked at his newly assembled Sound 5. However, now that you are my personal bodyguards, you will not be training in regular nin, gen, tai or even kinjutsu. You will be training mainly in fuinjutsu and variations of fuinjutsu. They nodded, eager to learn. Orochimaru smiled at this eagerness. Such trusting pawns. In the end, all that mattered was that they were nothing but human shields in all senses of the word. Completely willing human shields. Most of the time, you will be training directly underneath me. The jutsus you have chosen will require more chakra than even you can use in your current states with the seals active. They nodded and listened, taking in every word of their leader and in some cases, idle. Jirobu spoke up, voicing the thoughts on all of their minds. Orochimaru-sama, if we can't use them with our cursed seals active, how will we get enough chakra to ever use them? Orochimaru smiled as he chuckled lightly. Perhaps you should have chosen some easier jutsus, but there may be a way. Orochimaru let the possibility hang in the air. The children were taking it hook, line, and sinker. How? Orochimaru-sama. Orochimaru smiled. Now, to make sure that it was a physical impossibility for them to betray him even if they wanted to. The cursed seal has a second stage. Naruto gave Orochimaru a blank look. Second stage. Orochimaru's smile widened. This was easier than taking candy from a baby. A second stage that grants you far more power than the first, power that will let you use those jutsus as long as the second stage is active. How do we get this second stage, Orochimaru-sama? He turned to Sakin, who had asked the question. He had a feeling that the question would have come from him, considering he was always trying to prove he was the strongest of the five. Sakin-kun, if you use the first stage of the seal enough, it will eventually awaken. There is a much quicker method, however, you will not survive it until your friends have become able to use Fuinjutsu well. What do our friends have to do with it? Orochimaru glanced casually at Tayuya. This method will require you to commit suicide. That got their attention as Orochimaru pulled out a small glass bottle filled with black pills, shaking it much like a test tube in front of them. Needless to say, none of them were in any hurry to kill themselves if their facial expressions were anything to go by. Orochimaru put the bottle away when Naruto called out. Wait! Everyone looked at him in shock. Naruto had a calculated expression on his face. He thought about the options. He'd survived a particularly nasty brawl with an Oto Junin who had broken his back by lodging a kunai into his upper spine after a rather intense argument that resulted in the man becoming a live sacrifice to Manda. Within several days, Naruto had fully recovered. According to Orochimaru, the Kyuubi had healed him, saying that he may even be able to possibly regenerate lost limbs in the most extreme circumstances. Orochimaru smiled at Naruto. Is there something you want, Naruto-kun? Naruto looked at his leader and role model in pure determination. How does the pill kill you? Orochimaru smiled as he pulled the bottle back out. Much like a deadly poison would. It will destroy your body's cells. Naruto smiled. Destroyed cells were nothing. If a kunai through the chest could heal in a matter of seconds once it was removed, this should be nothing to worry about. I'll take the pill. The other four practically died from shock. Tayuya punched him over the head several times. You complete idiot. You heard what Orochimaru-sama said. You take it, you die. What the hell are you thinking? Naruto smiled as he got up, no fear or uncertainty in his voice. I can regenerate damage to my body quickly. You've seen what happens. All of them tried to take turns convincing him to stop, but he didn't pay any attention. He was going on the fact that Kyuubi would heal him. He didn't doubt it would be draining for even the Kyuubi, but it was worth a shot. Orochimaru smiled as he walked up to him, popping the lid off the bottle. Are you sure about this, Naruto-kun? Even as a Jinchuriki, you may not survive. Naruto shook his head. I don't care. I'll prove I can do it. Orochimaru sighed as he pulled out a single pill. If he did survive this, not only would he gain level 2 cursed seal, and be completely under his control, he might even be able to spread rumors about having an invincible warrior who could survive any injury. Indeed, Naruto would become a major piece in his plans. Not a pawn, more of a rook. Orochimaru handed the pill to Naruto, who looked at carefully. Tayuya may not say it directly, but Naruto was definitely the only person she could relate to. Having passed where they were scorned and called demons by everyone around them, he was able to understand her and she him. If anything, she almost dared to call him a friend. She looked at him with nothing but pure concern in her eyes. Naruto, If you goddamn eat that pill, I'll kill you. Everyone looked at her in surprise and interest. Sakin smirked. Since when did you start calling Naruto by his real name? She shot him a withering glare and a small amount of killer intent which Orochimaru had insisted they had all learned young. Shut it, you two-headed freak. Kidomaru smiled widely. Just admit it, you'll feel better. Tayuya launched at him and began having a scuffle. Naruto sighed. He really didn't want to listen to this again and knew if he waiting until they finished, they would physically stop him from eating the pill. He threw the pill into his mouth and swallowed it. Only Orochimaru had noticed this and smiled. Naruto's eyes widened as he fell to his knees and clutched his stomach and began moaning, effectively stopping everyone from either fighting or watching the fighting. He felt like his stomach was trying to rip itself apart, and the sensation spread out from there to cover his entire body. Tayuya got off Kidomaru and ran to Naruto's side, putting an arm on his shoulder. You idiot, Naruto. If you die, I'm going to summon you back from hell and kill you myself. Idiot. Naruto smiled weakly at her as another spasm of pain went through his body. I'll be fine, believe it, Tayuya-chan. With that, Naruto howled out in pain and dropped to the floor, unconscious. If it wasn't for the fact that Naruto was on the floor dying, the others would have laughed at the suffix Naruto had attached to her name and never let either of them live it down. However, the fact that their friend was now on the verge of death and there was nothing they could do about it was far more concerning. Kabuto chose that time to come around the corner and sighed as he pushed his glasses back up his nose. What's with all this noise? Kabuto then saw Naruto on the floor and his eyes narrowed. He ran over to the boy and checked his vitals. They were faint and erratic and getting worse by the second. Orochimaru smiled at his right-hand man. Kabuto, take Naruto to the infirmary and watch him closely. Kabuto nodded and picked Naruto up. Hi, Orochimaru-sama. The others looked at Naruto's limp form in pure fear while Orochimaru walked away, very interested in the results of this. 2 days later, the other 4 of the Sound 5 had been worried. Very worried. No word on Naruto's condition had been heard by anyone. After the second day of Naruto's death, they were in their rooms, lost in their own thoughts when a feeling of pure bloodlust, insanity and an urge to kill like no other washed over them. They froze as the walls and ceiling started crumbling under the intense chakra-infused emotions. After a few seconds, it stopped. All of them ran out of their rooms to see what had happened, seeing Odo Nins running everywhere in a panic. Obviously, they hadn't been wrong about that feeling. Jirobu looked at Naruto's door, or more specifically, underneath it. What's with the mist? They looked where Jirobu was indicating and saw a pitch-black mist oozing out from under Naruto's door. Tayuya, being the closest to his door, ran and ripped it open only to be covered in the black mist. She choked and spluttered as the arid mist invaded her mouth and burned her throat. Once it cleared, she saw Naruto standing on what might have been the remains of his bed. However, Naruto had partially released the first level of the cursed seal to cover the bottom part of his face. His eyes were the most startling change, however. The whites were now pitch black and his irises were blood red, his pupils slitted. He was looking at her with a confident smirk on his face. Believe it. Tayuya hid her own emotions of joy and worry for her friend by charging at him and smashing him over the head with her fist. You prize idiot. What the? Tayuya stopped there and noticed something. Naruto hadn't even moved a muscle when she smashed him over the head. He looked at her with nothing more than mock annoyance on his face. Really now, Tayuya-chan, is that anyone to treat a friend who's come back from the dead? Naruto had also noticed the others at the door. He took his eyes off Tayuya for a moment and looked at them, a slight smile touching his lips. Hey guys. Hope you didn't miss me too much. Naruto grimaced in pain as his flame tattoos reactivated and retreated to the seal on his navel. The others saw his eyes returning to the normal vibrant blue on white. He returned, looked over each of them and broke into a wide smile. You guys seriously have to get to level 2. All of them smiled and walked in, happy that their friend was alive. Jirobu put a hand on Naruto's shoulder. You had us all worried, Naruto. Naruto chuckled. I won't die. I can't die. Not until I achieve my dream. Naruto looked over Jirobu's shoulder from his raised position on the bed to see Orochimaru standing there. And what would that dream be, Naruto-kun? Naruto smiled with a heavy dose of sadism. To help you kill those bastards in Konoha and watch it burn to the ground for what they did to me, Orochimaru-sama. Orochimaru couldn't be more pleased. Orochimaru had long ago found out that removing free will from a living being was physically impossible. However, animated corpses had no free will. After a while, Orochimaru combined his research to create some sort of power amplification seal with his removal of free will and ended up with the cursed seal. The more the seal was used, the more it killed the bearer. The line was not clear-cut to anyone but Orochimaru as to when the person died. Yes, their heart kept beating, they continued breathing and had all of the other regular functions of a human, but they were not really living past a certain point. And that point was when the seal achieved the second level. Somehow, the Kyuubi had interfered in the process, gaining the second level without actually dying, meaning all of the power and free will as well. However, Orochimaru could tell that Naruto was not lying to him. Being surrounded by people who would betray him at the first opportunity they got meant it was essential to be able to read one's true intentions at all times, and Naruto was not lying in the slightest. Excellent, Naruto-kun. I have yet to see the appearance of a Stage 2 seal. Naruto smiled. So he was the first person to ever achieve Stage 2. He focused on activating the first level and then began to engage the second level. To the others, it seemed as if the black flames lit up again, but instead of retreating, they grew in size and turned his entire body black before softening into a sickly brown color. Naruto's blonde spikes turned jet black and grew in length to turn into a mane of sunlight-absorbing hair. His finger and toenails lengthened as did his canines. The triple slashes on his cheeks widened and darkened. The most shocking initial change of all was that Naruto's ears turned into elongated appendages covered in his hair that belonged to the Kyuubi no Kitsune. Naruto opened his eyes to reveal his whites were black and his irises were red. Naruto groaned in pain as they heard the sound of morphing flesh and bone. They heard a ripping noise as a tail of the same color as his skin shot out behind him. The others stumbled back, not just because of the physical changes but because they were literally forced back by the black chakra he was giving off in copious amounts. Naruto continued to groan as tail after tail continued to sprout from his tailbone. Finally, the ninth tail appeared and Naruto growled, releasing a massive spike of killer intent that even slightly affected Orochimaru. Orochimaru recovered and smiled at his creation. He really should get his hands on more Jinchurikis and give them cursed seals. This was the epitome of his research. Orochimaru smiled and approached Naruto, who grinned ferally at him. I must say, Naruto-kun, you do look quite frightening. Naruto shuddered as a particularly violent spasm of pain went through his body. Unable to hold the form anymore without severe repercussions, Naruto released it and returned to normal. Orochimaru grinned widely. If Naruto was even able to survive the sped-up corruption caused by the seal, let alone activate it for even a single minute at this age, This was a good indication that Naruto would become very powerful in the not-too-distant future. Naruto gasped for breath before he fell over unconscious from the strain. The others rushed to his side to see if he was okay while Orochimaru beamed at his subject. It's to be expected. It was highly unlikely that Naruto-kun would have even survived the pill's effects, let alone be able to activate his second level so soon. The others looked at him in astonishment. Then why did you give it to him, Orochimaru-sama? Orochimaru smiled and chuckled softly. To see if he was his father's child. That drew blank looks from the four other conscious people in the room as Orochimaru gave them a sigh and turned to leave. I had my suspicions that Naruto-kun was of royal lineage in Konoha. Kidomaru, being the brains of the group, got whiff of what Orochimaru was hinting at and his eyes practically popped out of his head when he put two and two together from his history lessons in that single sentence. No way. Everyone turned to Kidomaru as he was trembling. Tayuya was getting pissed off, as she usually did. If you know what he's talking about, then fill us in, idiot. Kidomaru looked back at Naruto and confirmed his suspicions. Mishiganai, Naruto's the son of the Yondaime Hokage. The other three froze as this sunk in while Orochimaru smiled widely at Kidomaru in that creepy fashion he was so famous for. You were always the perceptive one, Kidomaru-kun. Jirobu frowned at Orochimaru. Orochimaru-sama, if he's the son of the Yondaime Hokage, why did the people of his village hate him? Orochimaru sighed as he looked at Naruto in mock sympathy. Yondaime used his only son as the Kyuubi's vessel, but the fools of Konoha convinced themselves that he was the reincarnation of the Kyuubi, not a human. The others looked more shocked than should be possible. Naruto had saved them against his will and they treated him like that. This was a lot to take in. Tayuya smirked. I am so going to kill those shitheads. Demon Mai. The others smirked at her. Sakin grinned in an almost accusing fashion at her. You're really getting close to him, aren't you? To their surprise, Tayuya didn't deny it with a tirade of verbal abuse like normal. In fact, she was seething, much to the shock of others. She had said that as much for herself as for Naruto. That's not it, you two-headed freak. I hate all people who call others demons, even if it's not me. You better believe when I get my hands on them, I'll castrate them, the pieces of shit. The boys in the room winced. That was harsh and they felt a momentary pang of sympathy for any male who her anger was directed at. Orochimaru took that moment to leave. Turning around and taking several steps, he called over his shoulder. I'm expecting a lot from you five. Do not disappoint me. The four that were still conscious nodded and watched Orochimaru meld into the shadows of the dimly lit hallway, leaving them to their own devices. Little known to them, Naruto was not having a dreamless sleep. Or not in all senses of the word. He was currently standing in front of a very familiar cage with a slip of paper holding it shut that simply said, seal. However, what was currently of interest to the blonde was not the cage, but what it imprisoned. Naruto smirked at the nine-tailed fox spirit. Bet you like that, Baka Kitsune. The kitsune was far too exhausted to bite back with a witty reply. He'd been to hell and back just to make sure his jailer had survived the dreaded pill he was given. When I get out of here, I will particularly enjoy killing you and those pathetic apes you call friends. Naruto smiled at the fox. Naruto had quickly found out when he had started visiting the damn oversized fur ball that if he died, so did it. Naruto had worked out that the fox, if not all demons in general, valued their life above all else. So, as payment for making his early life a living hell, he enjoyed finding ways to severely injure himself. Even trapped in the cage, knowing he would die eventually, the fox still tried to live the last few decades of his unnatural life, no matter the cost. The fox couldn't believe he was bowing to the whims of a mortal, and the son of the ape who put him in this predicament no less. It was demeaning, to say the least. However, what the filthy ape of a container said next caught him off guard. Teach me something cool. The fox may be old by mortal standards, but its mind showed no signs of aging, perhaps apart from the fact that he had not expected this of all things he might say. What did you say, brat? You heard me, you overgrown ball of fur. Teach me something cool. The king of the demons started a small chuckle. The chuckle turned into giggles, which in turn became full-blown laughter. Ever heard a 100-meter tall fox laughing at you from the distance of less than 25 meters? In one word, it was deafening. Naruto gritted and put up with the noise as the Kyuubi slowly stopped and looked at Boy. Even by human standards, you're exceedingly dense. Naruto raised an eyebrow. And what makes you say that, O great lord of all knowledge? The sarcasm dripping off the sentence was impossible to miss. The fact that you think I'm going to teach you anything. Naruto smiled. This was his mindscape. He could do anything here. He materialized a kunai and brought it to his own neck, much to the dismay of the Kyuubi. How many times are we going to do this? Teach me something cool, or else. To illustrate his point, Naruto touched the kunai tip to his neck and just for show, grossly exaggerated the trickle of blood to make a geyser of blood spray out from his neck. Oh, the agony. The Kyuubi sweat dropped. This boy was really unusual. In public, he was completely different than in his mind. He had his own theories that all humans were like this, but did not expect the differences between his public and private personalities to be so blatant. He'd never encountered a human like him. Not in his 10,000 or so years of existence. Then again, he'd never gotten to know a human this well. Still, he decided to indulge the strange boy, if only to prevent him from any more of these episodes. Listen up, Gaki. Regardless of the fact that you want me to teach you something, which I would be one of the things you humans refer to as jutsus, there comes a point when jutsus become nothing but concentrated blasts of chakra. There is no need for giving them names. Naruto looked at the spirit of the kitsune with a deadpanned expression. That's boring. The Kyuubi looked at the boy, mirroring the deadpanned expression. What was it with these goddamn humans and having to name everything? A blast of chakra is a blast of chakra, no matter its shape, size, power or appearance. You really are dense. Naruto looked up at the kitsune. One of the other changes he'd been shocked to find after taking the pill and visiting the kitsune was that his fur was no longer red. He was completely black. It probably had something to do with the fact that 3 rather large pulsating purple pipes had appeared and were leading from the network of pipes in the roof directly inside the kitsune's cage. It would definitely explain why his chakra when activating the cursed seal was black instead of red. Naruto immediately thought of something that could prove useful. Is there a kitsune summoning contract? The king of demons raised an eyebrow, or the fur-covered skin above the eye in his case. Demon summoning contracts are not as simple as regular ones. Naruto slapped his forehead. Demons had to be difficult, didn't they? Let me guess. One can only sign the contract if they undergo some sort of trial rite. The kitsune nodded slightly. Like all demons, they will only listen to those who are stronger than they and only if they are constantly held in check. Unless you feel like taking over my position as king of demons full-time and force the temporary kitsune leader into submission and make sure they stay there, don't even bother, brat. Naruto did not particularly feel like pulling out 9 taels worth of chakra just to earn the right to sign a contract that he would never be able to use because of the fact he would be dead before the fight ended. Orochimaru wouldn't let him sign the snake contract and he couldn't get his hands on any other type. So in short, no summoned minions for him. It would be interesting to have a black nine-tailed kitsune smashing things to pieces under his command. From what he'd heard, Jinchurikis were able to take on their tenants' appearances in not only form but height and power as well. The one downside was that this was really only feasible for the first three-tailed beasts. Any more than that and they would end up killing themselves and releasing their tenants before they attained their true form. The best he could come up with was a rather large-scale henge no jutsu when he was in the second stage of the cursed seal. Once he was old enough to be able to withstand 4 tails of power, he should be able to level a rather large portion of Konoha in a single blast of chakra. Not to mention he should be pretty much invincible, if what his tenant had said was true. Only problem was, it would be so much power that blood would literally be ripped from his pores and even if he survived, his lifespan would be shortened. Nothing in this world was truly free. Naruto shook himself from the train of thought and looked back up at the kitsune who was looking at him with a bland expression on his face. Get out of here. I've had enough of you. Naruto smirked as he returned back to the realm of the living. When he came to, he saw that his room looked like an exploding tag had hit it. Naruto's sweat dropped. I'm really going to have to stop releasing my seal inside the compound. Naruto looked at his watch and saw that it was almost 5 a.m. He'd been out for a while. Naruto heard a sigh from his doorway and looked up to see Kabuto standing there, surveying the blast zone that was formerly Naruto's room with a look that expressed mild amusement as well as slight annoyance. Naruto-kun, I wish you would stop doing this. This is the second time I've had to have your room repaired. Naruto looked somewhat sheepish. As long as you were in Kabuto's good books, he wasn't that bad a guy. He tended to have a dry sense of humor and was fairly easygoing. New members of the Oto ninja sometimes made the mistake of calling him a lazy bum or some such. Occasionally, Kabuto would let it slide, but the particular Oto nin usually disappeared fairly quickly, leaving no traces of his existence behind. When Kabuto did deal with it at the time, he would be smiling at them before they started hacking up blood and died a rather painful death. Less experienced ninjas didn't even see him move, while the upper Chunin and Junin saw that he used a chakra scalpel to do some rather serious damage in under a second. People quickly stopped pestering him or insulting him unless they had a death wish. Snapping back to the present, Naruto looked around the room and then back at Kabuto. If Orochimaru-sama's reaction was anything to go by, it's a small price to pay. Kabuto nodded slightly in agreement. I don't think anyone in Oto didn't feel that chakra, Naruto-kun. As for now, take a spare room down the hall until I can have this fixed. Naruto nodded and smiled slightly at Kabuto. Arigato, Kabuto-san. Kabuto sighed and waved Naruto off. Truthfully, Orochimaru, Kabuto and Naruto all had a somewhat unusual relationship. All of them were Konoha Nukenins who shared a loathing for the damn village and its people. Naruto looked up to Kabuto as somewhat of a mentor and older brother. Although Kabuto had seen Naruto initially as nothing more than a tool that should be used to serve its purpose, after a while he'd seen that Naruto was more than just a pawn and shared a lot of Kabuto's own personal beliefs. Also, Naruto's attitude just seemed to have an effect on people. Most of the time, the ninjas of Oto were either scared of slipping up lest they incur the wrath of one of their superiors or they just didn't care, as long as they were paid. The closest term that could apply to Naruto was a mixture between moral booster, comic relief and leader. He didn't kill people because they stepped out of line. Instead, he just activated the first level of the cursed seal and smiled ferally at them, usually with a rather sadistic comment thrown in to boot before retuning to normal and smiling sweetly at them. The response he got was surprisingly similar to what Mitarashi Anko got in Konoha from what Kabuto saw during his spy missions. Naruto walked down the hallway to the next available room, leaving Kabuto and several Oto nins to clean up the mess. Year and several months later, Naruto and the other four had been summoned to Orochimaru by Kabuto himself, which usually meant it was important. Once they got to the room, Orochimaru smiled at them. I believe all of you are now capable of starting missions. However, the first mission you will complete is of utmost importance to Oto. The objective of this mission is the son of the Yondaime Kazekage, a red-haired boy by the name of Gaara. Everyone raised an eyebrow in various degrees of shock at this. Orochimaru seemed to sense this and chuckled. No, you will not be killing him. On the contrary, I want you to bring him back with you alive. Naruto nodded and he tried to figure out what the reason for this abduction was. Orochimaru never did anything without a reason. Orochimaru-sama, what is it about Gaara that interests you? Orochimaru smiled at Naruto. The boy was beginning to understand the way he worked quite well. This should also interest you, Naruto-kun. Gaara is another like you, a Jinchuriki. Naruto's eyes widened while the others turned to their unofficial leader. Naruto's look of shock turned into a calculative scowl. Which one is he? Orochimaru smiled. The Aikibi's container. Naruto's scowl morphed into a devious grin usually associated with a fox that's had a rather cunning idea. Leave it to us, Orochimaru-sama. Orochimaru smiled widely. I know you will succeed. You will leave tomorrow morning for Sunagakur. They nodded and bowed as they left the room. A part of the far-shadowed wall warped as things did when a genjutsu was dispelled, revealing Kabuto. Kabuto looked at Orochimaru in concern. Orochimaru-sama, perhaps you should have sent back up with them. Orochimaru smiled at his right-hand man. Kabuto was really only concerned about Naruto, and not the others. They will be fine. After all, why wouldn't Naruto-kun attempt to gain more friends like himself? Kabuto said nothing, which meant he had nothing more to say. A week and a half later, near Sunagakur, the Sound 5 ran across the dunes, seeing the rocky outcrop that Sunagakur was nestled in. Naruto turned to the others as they kept running. Going in through the front would be stupid. They nodded in agreement. Kidomaru smiled as he thought about their situation. They will probably expect an attack from the back, so why not go over the sides? Naruto nodded in agreement. Okay, everyone turn on their headsets. Everyone pressed the button to turn them on and began testing. Naruto began the procedure. Sound 1. Jirobu went next. 2. Kidomaru tested next. 3. Tayuya tested. 4. 5 and 6. Tayuya smacked Sakin over the head. Baka. Since when did your body invading freak of a brother count as a separate person? Uken looked at Tayuya in a mock hurt. I have feelings too, Tayuya-chan. In response, he got a smack over the head with Tayuya's genjutsu flute. I didn't ask for your opinion, and don't call me that again, bastard. Uken smiled and went back to sleep. Naruto turned his head around. Guys, if you see Gaara, alert me immediately, but do not interfere. If anyone's going to convince him, it'll be me. Remove your Hitai 8. They nodded and removed their forehead protectors, stowing them away for safekeeping. They were almost within range of Suna. Naruto narrowed his eyes. Split. All 5 of them split up to enter Suna from several different directions. On top of the wall of the east part of Sunagakur, Naruto was perched on top of the rocky ledge surrounding the east part of the village. This is 1, I'm ready to enter. Naruto waited for the others to report in. 2. Ready. Same here with 4. 5. Waiting for instructions. 3. Ready. Naruto narrowed his eyes and smiled. Commence mission. All 5 of them jumped into Suna and began to scout for the red-haired Tanuki container. With Tayuya. Tayuya heard several children playing some sort of ball game and she sneered in disgust. However, when she looked around the corner, she saw what was most likely the target sitting on a swing to the side of the playground, holding a teddy bear and looking at the children devoid of emotions. Tayuya smiled as she slipped back around the corner and held her mic closer to her mouth. This is 3. I've found the target. Activating tracker. Tayuya pulled up her sleeve to reveal what to most would look like a watch. It was a watch, however. She pressed a button on the side and the backlight started flashing on and off with a second in between each flash. It was standard ninja equipment in Odo, and it was extremely unlikely that other villages could pick up this particular wavelength. Soon enough, the other 4 gathered. Naruto smiled as he looked around the corner. Nice work, Tayuya. Tayuya smirked at her accomplishment as Naruto wrapped his cloak around himself, hiding his Odo elite uniform. He smiled and gave his team thumbs up. Time to move in for the kill. Make sure no one interferes. They nodded and took up positions in the shadows around the perimeter of the playground as Naruto calmly walked up to the swing beside Gaara and took a seat. Naruto purposefully ignored him, looking at the children playing. Gaara noticed him and remained silent, hoping he wouldn't notice him and, like everyone else, run away screaming. Naruto sighed and gave himself a slight push, using a speech with Kyuubi's help that he couldn't put into words. While the giant fur ball may only care about itself, it knew that subordinates and allies were important to maintain its life, and so agreed to help him. To be accepted. That caught Gaara's attention as he looked at Naruto. Is it a crime to want to be accepted? Gaara looked at Naruto in astonishment when Naruto looked at him with eyes that showed pain, suffering and most of all, understanding. Naruto smiled weakly. Especially since people like us are the only reason other humans still live today. Naruto shook his head and gave another slight push, making the chains creak. Gaara looked at Naruto in something close to fear. Who are you? Naruto looked at Gaara with a sad smile. My name's Naruto. I'm just like you, a demon container. I know what it feels like. The pain, the fear, the loneliness, the ache in your heart, the craving for acceptance. Gaara looked at Naruto in shock. He was just like him. Naruto looked at Gaara with a smile. Gaara, do you want to be my friend? I'm sure you're a really nice guy. Gaara practically fainted. This boy was asking to be his friend. Gaara nodded and smiled, happy that he'd made his first friend. Naruto looked stern for a moment. Gaara, although we're friends, you can't talk about me to anyone just yet, okay? Gaara looked at Naruto questioningly. Gaara, I'm not from this village. If they found out, they would kill me. Gaara gasped, but readily agreed. If that's what it took to keep a friend, then he'd do it. Naruto looked up when a boy on the field cried out, "SHOOT." Naruto saw the ball fly right over the goal posts and on top of the building. Gaara noticed too. Naruto turned to Gaara. Gaara, I'm going to leave for a bit. Don't worry, I'll be back soon. Gaara nodded and Naruto disappeared. The other members of the Sound Five appeared next to Naruto as he hid behind a building. Naruto smiled at them. It seems that Gaara won't come just yet. It won't be long though, another few days at most. Let's get out of the village and keep an eye on him when we get the chance. They nodded and ran up the wall and over the edge of the walls of Sunagaku, keeping a careful eye on Gaara whenever he came close to the walls. Next night, the Sound Five were watching Gaara as he sat on a rooftop, talking to himself. All five of them noticed a solitary figure appeared behind him and began levitating kunai that were pointed at Gaara. Naruto motioned for them to wait while he went ahead. They nodded as Naruto leapt down behind Gaara and began blocking the kunai as they were projected forward as a wall of sharpened metal. Gaara gasped and turned around to see his new friend blocking the kunai with his own. Naruto snarled at the man, ripping off his cloak to reveal his Oto uniform. He glared at the masked ninja. What the hell do you think you're doing? Don't you realize it's hard enough for him to hold Shukaku back with his will alone? You're not helping him. Or do you want Shukaku released again? That seemed to strike a nerve, if the subtle flinch was anything to go by. He silently produced another pair of kunai sets and projected them at Naruto. Naruto may have been skilled for his age, but he still couldn't block all of them. Several embedded themselves in his chest, legs and arms. Naruto grunted as he fell to the ground and remained still, his blood pooling around him. Gaara was being backed into the last pocket of sanity as he saw his only friend die to protect him. Gaara steeled his resolve as he engulfed the masked Suna Nin in sand and then crushed him. He walked up to the ninja and noticed a bandage on his right ring finger. Gaara seized up as he slowly reached for the ninja's face mask and pulled it off to confirm his worst suspicions. You are strong as expected, Gaara-sama. Gaara gripped his heart as he felt a foreign power try to corrupt him from the inside. Yashimaru. Gaara fell to his knees and clutched his head, screaming in pure pain and anguish. Yashimaru, Dushite. Yashimaru looked up at the sky and noticed it was a full moon. He silently cursed his luck. Shukaku's influence over his container had always become more apparent when it was a full moon. It was an order. Gaara looked up at Yashimaru as he explained. I was ordered to kill you, by your father. Gaara looked at Yashimaru with a massive amount of hope in his eyes seen in that of only the most desperate people. Then you did this unwillingly because father ordered you to. No, that's not correct. Gaara's eyes widened as he felt the last of his will slipping to the foreign force in his body. It's true I received the order from Kazekage-sama, but I could have refused it if I wished. Gaara-sama, deep within my heart, I hated you. You took the life of my beloved sister when you were born. My sister's memento, I tried to think of you as her treasured child, but I couldn't. My sister did not wish for your birth. She became this village's sacrifice, and she died cursing it. After that, I carried a wound that could never heal. Yashimaru sighed and coughed up a chunk of blood. This is it. Please die, Gaara-sama. Yashimaru opened his flak jacket to reveal a mass of exploding tags that he had just activated. They exploded, covering the entire rooftop in a ball of orange-yellow flame. The remaining members of the Sound Five saw their leader just starting to stand up when the explosion went off and charged in. Naruto. Gaara looked up as four strange people surrounded Naruto who grimaced from the pain, but looked up at Gaara with a weak smile on his face. Everyone present saw that leading outward from the wall of sand in front of Gaara was an area of roof that had remained untouched by the explosion, and Naruto was right in the middle of it. Thanks for protecting me, Gaara. If you hadn't made that wall of sand, I'd be dead now. Gaara's tortured face brightened somewhat when he saw his friend was still alive. Naruto. Naruto smiled at Gaara. I don't die that easily. Gaara looked at Naruto and then back at the blood-splattered crater, as if torn by some internal decision. Naruto saw his chance. Gaara, this is almost the same thing that happened to me in my village when I left. I had no one, nothing. However, a man saved me from assassination and told me that this treatment wasn't normal. He took me to a village where you are expected to be different from others, A village that won't hate you or try to kill you for being who you are. Since I joined the village several years ago, I've become one of the most powerful people there. The only thing you need to do to stay there is serve our leader, Orochimaru-sama. If you serve him well, he will acknowledge you and train you. He will give you power beyond your wildest dreams. And for his elites, he takes special interest in them and trains them to be his personal bodyguards. I have no doubt you will be able to join the 5 of us in the elites in no time at all, Gaara. Will you come with us? Gaara slowly got to his feet and stared at them, his eyes completely void of emotion. I want to go to this place. I want to be accepted. I want the power to destroy this village for what they've done to me. I'm coming with you. Naruto smiled. As he slowly returned to his feet, his wounds completed their rapid healing. He walked up to Gaara and placed a hand on his shoulder. Let's go, Gaara, my friend. Gaara nodded and the 6 of them left the rooftop just before the nearest ninja patrol got there to inspect the damage, disappearing into the night. 2 weeks later, at Oto. They had taken another several days to get back than it had taken to get there due to the fact that Gaara was never much of a speed person. Now that their mission was over, they returned to their normal attitudes. When Gaara asked why they changed, Naruto shrugged. We figured while we're on missions, it would be better to focus on the mission and not playing around like we usually do. One of the days when they stopped for something to eat, Tayuya went on another one of her verbal tirades. Gaara had no idea what any of these things meant and had asked what each and every curse had meant. The 4 had outvoted Tayuya and made her explain it to Gaara, since she said them and not the others. Sakin laughed at Tayuya was clearly struggling to maintain her, I don't give a damn, exterior while explaining. Maybe you should take Jirobu's advice and not speak like that. Tayuya scowled as she smacked Sakin over the head with her flute. I don't care what that fat-ass said, you two-headed freak. Gaara was trying to comprehend this. Naruto had told him that no one would pick on others because they were different. Naruto sighed and looked at Gaara. There's a difference between when she's swearing at someone who's not her friend and someone who is. For those of us who are her friends, she'll make one name from our physical appearances and will only use that to refer to us. To everyone else, she'll use general cussing and most likely kill them if they step out of line. Gaara nodded slowly. Tayuya looked back at Gaara and Naruto and scowled. Does he get much sleep? He looks like an insomniac. Naruto smiled. This was Tayuya's process of thinking up a name for a friend. Gaara looked down but felt Naruto's hand on his shoulder. He looked up from the ground to see Naruto smiling at him. She's trying to decide on a name for you. It's a good sign. At this, Tayuya threw a rice ball at Naruto's head. Not expecting it, Naruto copped it right to the face. It slid down his face before he pulled it off and took a bite out of it. After munching several times and swallowing, Naruto smiled. Tasty. Thanks, Tayuya-chan. Everyone but Gaara and Naruto sweat dropped. Tayuya fumed at her unofficial leader's strange reaction. Jirobu raised an eyebrow as he took his own rice ball. I don't think we'll ever fully understand you, Naruto. Naruto shrugged as he chucked the last of the rice ball into his mouth, chewing several times before swallowing. He cracked a grin at his friends and teammates. What's there not to understand? Kidomaru looked at Naruto deadpanned. The fact that you can turn an insult into something so weird. Sakin agreed. Who the hell would cop a rice ball to the face and then thank the person who threw it? Naruto smiled widely. Me. They all sweat dropped again. Tayuya snorted at Naruto. And that's the point the fat-ass was trying to make, Fox boy. You're the only one who would do something that screwed up. Naruto scratched the back of his head sheepishly. They talked for a while longer before they continued back towards Odo. When they asked Gaara how much faster he could go, he said not much. Apparently, he focused on power over speed. Once they got to the gates of the Odo village, Gaara shrunk back behind Naruto out of habit. Naruto sighed. Is this how he acted when he first came here? Naruto walked up to the guard who saluted them. Naruto-san, Orochimaru-sama requested that you be sent to him immediately upon your arrival. Naruto nodded and they walked through the gates. Gaara quickly noticed that people gave him a single glance and then went back to whatever they were doing. Since Naruto had come here almost 3 years ago, Odo had prospered immensely. When he first came here, it was nothing but an overgrown underground bunker in the middle of nowhere. Now, however, it had a proper village surrounding it. Naruto led his teammates and new friend to the entrance to the bunker, and the guards posted outside the door saluted as they passed. Naruto led them down the spiral stairs and through the secret passageway into the main area of the ninja headquarters of the village. Naruto walked past the door to Kabuto's research room, wondering absent-mindedly if he was here or in Konoha. His silent question was answered when the door opened to reveal Kabuto. Kabuto smiled at Naruto and raised a hand in greeting. Good to see you back again, Naruto-kun. Naruto smiled at Kabuto. Arigato, Kabuto-san. Kabuto smiled when he saw a head of red spikes hiding behind Naruto. Feigning ignorance, he looked questioningly at Naruto. Who's your friend, Naruto-kun? Naruto smiled as he looked at Gaara and then back at Kabuto. This is Gaara. Gaara, this is the man who saved me 3 years ago. Don't worry, he won't bite, unless you try to attack him, anyway. Gaara slowly made his way out from behind Naruto and saw Kabuto crouching in front of him and smiling. Pleased to meet you, Gaara-kun. I'm Kabuto. Gaara nodded and mumbled a hello. Kabuto smiled and stood up from his crouching position and sighed as he pushed his glasses back up the bridge of his nose. Reminds me of you when I brought you here, Naruto-kun. Naruto smirked slightly. We were all like that once. Kabuto nodded in agreement. Indeed. Well, I'm being deployed back to Konoha for a few months. I'll see you guys later. They nodded as Kabuto walked down the hallway and disappeared into the shadows. Gaara looked at Naruto questioningly. Naruto, what is this Orochimaru person like? Jirobu looked at Gaara. Gaara, I suggest referring to Orochimaru as Orochimaru-sama. He's very strict about formalities, even with Naruto, who is pretty much fourth in command of Odo behind Orochimaru-sama's apprentice, Kabuto-san, and Orochimaru-sama himself. They nodded in agreement. Naruto led the party right to the heart of the underground headquarters. The 2 Junin guards nodded at Naruto and one of them knocked on the door. They could hear Orochimaru's voice from within. What is it? The guard's expression remained stoic, much to his credit. Orochimaru-sama, the Sound 5 have returned. There was a moment's pause before Orochimaru answered. Come in. The guard looked at them as he let them pass. A look that said, thank God. After they had entered the room, the door clicked shut and they were cast into almost total darkness. They could make out the faint outline of Orochimaru sitting in his throne. Naruto stepped forward and bowed before raising his head to smile at his leader. Mission success, Orochimaru-sama. Orochimaru smiled at Naruto and then at the other 4. I expected no less from you 5. Orochimaru focused his gaze at Gaara, who remained motionless. Gaara saw Orochimaru smile. You would be Gaara-kun, then? Gaara nodded. Hi, Orochimaru-sama. Orochimaru smiled as he motioned Gaara forward. Gaara looked at Naruto, who nodded. Gaara stepped forward and stood directly in front of Orochimaru. Orochimaru stood and placed a hand on Gaara's cheek. What is it you seek? Power. Acknowledgement. Revenge. Gaara blushed mildly at the sign of affection but answered with a steady voice. I want to be acknowledged like a regular person. I want to power to crush Suna for turning me into this. Gaara looked at himself to indicate his point. Orochimaru took his hand away and sat back in his chair. That's not possible. Everyone looked at Orochimaru in shock, waiting for his explanation. Gaara-kun, here in Oto, there is no such thing as a regular person. All of us were outcasts from our own villages because they were unable to accept the fact that we are too different from them, and so they fear us. By creating this village, I wished to create a place for all those who are shunned by the villages for their own foolish reasons to call home. Gaara's eyes lit up. This place was full of people like him, who would understand him. He would do anything to stay here. And you wish for acknowledgement, power and revenge? Gaara nodded. Hi, Orochimaru-sama. Orochimaru smiled and chuckled softly. If you serve me, I will give you the power you need to complete your revenge. If you sever me as well as the 5 behind you have up to now, I will acknowledge you. Will you do it? Gaara smiled and nodded his head. Hi, Orochimaru-sama. Orochimaru smiled. Perfect. I now have 2 ultimate weapons under my possession. Akatsuki will not likely attack me now, considering they always work in pairs to take out a single Jinchuriki. Orochimaru looked at Naruto. Naruto-kun, I assume you know what to do. Naruto nodded. Hi, Orochimaru-sama. Orochimaru smiled at them. I will most likely need you again in the near future. Good job. They bowed and left the room with Gaara in tow, but Naruto remembered something and turned back around. Orochimaru-sama, is it possible to grow parts of or all of your body with chakra? Orochimaru's eyebrows raised. Why do you want to know, Naruto-kun? Naruto began recounting what he had seen and felt since he woke up after the level 2 activation, and his conversation with the Kyuubi before getting to the point. So because I can't summon, I was wondering if it is possible to grow a part of your body with your chakra. At the least, I want to be able to increase the length of my hair to cover my entire body, but preferable be able to grow in size so I can tower over regular people. Orochimaru smiled as he thought about what he could do. And why would you want to cover your body during the second stage, Naruto-kun? Naruto smiled. I look half dead when I activate my second level seal. I want to be able to grow my hair to completely cover my body. If I could also increase my body size, it would have much more of an effect on my opponents as well, Orochimaru-sama. Orochimaru smiled. Indeed, having the reincarnation of a black-furred Kyuubi would be particularly frightening. I will see what I can do, Naruto-kun. Naruto bowed again to Orochimaru. Thank you, Orochimaru-sama. Orochimaru smiled as he began thinking through the possibilities. No problem, Naruto-kun. You are dismissed. Naruto led Gaara and the others out of the room and down the dimly lit hallways towards the first stop. Naruto pushed open a door to reveal the room Kabuto had stopped to get Naruto's clothes after he had his first meeting. Naruto walked past the rows of folded sheets and blankets, grabbing some clean towels before getting to the clothes. He walked up to the single pile of Oto Elite clothes and looked through it to find one about his own height, since Gaara stood practically level with him. When he found one, he pulled it off the stack and then walked back out. Naruto closed the door behind him and handed the clothes to Gaara and the towels to everyone. Gaara was about to put them on when Naruto stopped him. We should all probably have a shower. It's been almost a month since we 5 had one. No kidding. You guys all smell real sweaty. They all looked at Tayuya in the same deadpan expression. Sakin spoke their minds. And you don't. Tayuya smacked him over the head. What the hell are you talking about? Kidomaru whispered to Naruto. How many brain cells do you think he has left after being hit so many times? Naruto shrugged. Not as many as he had before, that's for sure if he hasn't learned his lesson yet. Kidomaru silently agreed as they came up to the bathrooms. Tayuya pushed open the door to the female room while the boys went into the men's room. The 4 boys that were already part of the Sound 5 took off their purple rope sashes and put them on the bench. Kidomaru saw Gaara looking at them and half smiled. Once you graduate, you'll get one of your own. Come on, we're taking a shower. Gaara nodded and followed them into the block. He saw each of them take a different stall, so he followed their example, taking one at the far end near Naruto. He still felt somewhat unsafe here, so he tended to stick near what he knew was safe. Gaara saw each of the boys, or more correctly, their hands hanging their clothes and towels over the top of the stalls so they didn't get wet and they could put them back on after they had finished. After each of them had finished their shower, they dried themselves and changed. Once they stepped out of the stalls, they waited for Gaara. Once he stepped out, they took their towels and dumped them in the laundry bin near the door. When they stepped outside, they saw Tayuya standing there looking very peeved. What the hell took you so long? Gaara looked at her, answering for the group. From my experience, females enjoy the shower for an unknown reason. I assumed you would have taken longer, so I took my time. Tayuya looked at Gaara and tried to refrain from whacking him over the head. The hell you mean you thought I was going to take longer, insomniac? Naruto smiled and put a hand on Gaara's shoulder. Welcome to the club. Gaara looked up at Naruto for an explanation while he just smirked. She's given you a name, meaning that she's accepted you into the group. Tayuya's name for someone is sort of the unofficial approval of everyone else in the group. Gaara nodded and smiled slightly. He now had 5 friends. He was not regretting coming to Oto whatsoever. The group continued down the hall until they got to a corridor with doors set in it along one wall. Each of them split up and took their own door, but Naruto indicated to Gaara which one he should take, the one directly in front of his. Naruto looked at Gaara and smiled. It's too late to do any sort of decent training, so we have to stay in our rooms. We'll come and get you tomorrow and see what sort of training Orochimaru-sama wants you to do. Night, Gaara. Gaara nodded at Naruto. Night, Naruto. They both took their separate doors and retired for the night, unsure of what the next day would bring. Next morning, at 5 a.m., Naruto knocked on Gaara's door. There was no response, so he knocked again. Oi, Gaara, you up? I do not sleep. Naruto should have guessed. The black rings of insomnia around his eyes were a dead giveaway. Naruto focused back as Gaara opened the door in his new robes and nodded to him. Good morning. Morning. Gaara shut the door behind him and stepped beside Naruto as they walked down several corridors to a set of double doors which Naruto pushed open. Gaara noticed it was a mess hall, and judging by the number of people in here, the main one. Naruto led Gaara up to a line of people and grabbed a pair of trays. He handed one to Gaara and absent-mindedly held his tray by his side. They moved up with the line until Naruto noticed one of the Junins start yelling at the cook for taking so long. Naruto sighed as he put his tray down and motioned Gaara to follow him. Gaara also put his tray down and they stood behind the Junin. Naruto waited until the Junin finally realized that there were people behind him and turned around to look at them. Naruto stared at the man. I'm wondering how exactly you made it to Junin when you didn't notice us for a good minute and a half. The Junin's sweat dropped. These two were his superiors and answered only to Orochimaru. Gaara looked at the man with narrowed eyes. You said they were taking too long. I do not see others complaining. You have been in line for exactly 2 minutes and 46 seconds since we arrived. At that point, you were near the back of the line, indicating you had just come in. Naruto smiled at Gaara's monotone voice. Naruto looked back at the man. Well, if it's still not fast enough for you, maybe you could do it faster by yourself. You'd look good in an apron and chef's hat. The entire room apart from Naruto and Gaara sweat dropped. The Junin nodded and scurried off with his food while Naruto nodded at the server who smiled at him before taking Gaara back to their spot, which the latest addition to the line smirked as he vacated for them. The Genin spoke up to them. Thanks for taking him down a peg. He's my Junin sensei and sometimes he's too full of himself for his own good. Naruto turned around and grinned at him. The boy wore bandages that covered his entire head except his left eye. Naruto looked at the Genin in interest. I don't think I've seen you around before, you knew. Dosu smirked and nodded as he extended his hand, which Naruto took. Kinyuta Dosu. You're Naruto, right? Naruto nodded and turned to give a sidelong glance at Gaara when Dosu extended his hand. Gaara slowly extended his own hand and took it. Naruto sighed and shook his head. Gaara, we're really going to have to work on your social skills. Gaara nodded while Dosu took his hand back. By now, Naruto and Gaara were pretty much at the front of the line. When Naruto stepped up, he smiled at the chef. Naruto-san, thanks for backing up my workmate. Naruto waved it off. Some people are too stupid to realize that without the trash, as they call them, things around here won't work. The chef smiled as he began pulling plates out of the heated glass display. The usual, I presume. Naruto nodded and the chef placed a bowl of ramen, a plate of bacon, eggs and sausages as well as a glass of milk on his tray. Naruto smiled widely at the man. Thanks, old man. The old man waved him off and looked at Gaara with a smile, who stared blankly at the man. Naruto's sweat dropped. He would have a lot of work to do. Gaara, pick the things from the display you want to eat. Gaara nodded and looked through the display. 4 sausages, 3 eggs, 6 rashers of bacon, a bowl of ramen and a glass of milk. Naruto smiled. It seemed that being a demon container gave you a dramatically increased metabolism. The chef dumped the stuff onto the plate and Gaara stepped up beside Naruto while the two joined their teammates at the unofficial, elites, table. Naruto took his usual seat next to Tayuya while Gaara took the seat to his other side. Naruto picked up a knife and fork and began shoveling the food in, much to the others' amusement. You act like you haven't eaten in months, fox boy. Naruto looked up at Tayuya, half an egg hanging out of his mouth. Well, I kinder haven't. Jirobu gave Naruto's poor display of table manners a reproachful look. Naruto, talk when you don't have a mouthful of food. Naruto shrugged and ate the rest of his mouthful before smiling. I said I kinda haven't. Rice balls and ration bars every day for a month isn't what I call food. No one could really fault him there. Naruto put his now clear plate that was not too long ago covered in bacon, eggs and sausages to the side and dug into his ramen. Everyone else ate their food at a much more sedate pace. After Gaara had finished, Naruto looked at him. Gaara, does your sand always protect you without you controlling it? Gaara nodded while Naruto's face scrunched up. Then it's going to be kind of hard for Orochimaru-sama to give you the power he said he would. Gaara looked at Naruto and slightly tilted his head to the side. Why? Naruto didn't want to explain too much here in the mess hall. Basically, he uses a seal that will bring your full power to the surface forcibly. I'm not allowed to talk about it in public, though. Gaara nodded as he finished off the last of his ramen and put it to the side. Now that everyone had finished their breakfasts, they stood up and put their trays in a pile on top of the pile of them from other people who had finished their own breakfast. They headed out the door and immediately felt Orochimaru's presence nearby. Orochimaru stepped out of the darkness and smiled at his prize students. Orochimaru-sama, did you need something? Orochimaru chuckled at Naruto. I have been researching my records of jutsus from my days in Konoha. It seems that the Akimichis were able to increase their size by use of chakra. However, it is a clan bloodline jutsu, and I was not able to find an Akimichi willing to part with the secret. Naruto smiled at the implications. He never got to perform his medical experiments on an Akimichi to learn their bloodline jutsus. Would you like us to retrieve one? Orochimaru smiled widely. Very perceptive, Naruto-kun. Yes, I want you to go to Konoha and retrieve an Akimichi. This could be useful to the both of us. Naruto nodded. He didn't like the idea of going back to Konoha, but if it was to help him kill them later, it was worth it. He was broken out of his train of thoughts by Orochimaru talking to them. However, I wish for the 6 of you to come to the underground training area at midday. Do not be late. They nodded as Orochimaru turned to leave. I will see just how much they have grown. Midday, underground training area. The 6 of them wondered why they had been called. The only time Orochimaru ever called them there was when they would engage in some form of combat. Whether that combat was a spar or keeping the prisoners in line, since it was also the prisoners' exercise area. The 6 of them walked through the dimly lit corridors, through steel doors and finally onto a ledge that overlooked the exercise area, to see Orochimaru there with Kimimaro on his knees in front of him. He looked at his 5 companions to see them looking down at the exchange with interest. Kimimaro stood and looked up at them. Which do you choose? To die, or to obey? Sakin predictably got ready to jump over the railing. Obey, is what you'll do. Everyone but Naruto and Gaara jumped down, making Naruto sigh as the 2 remaining boys jumped down to join them. Sakin, Kidomaru, Jirobu and Tayuya activated their cursed seals and charged. Naruto's eyes widened in disbelief as Kimimaro dispatched each of them with one blow. Kimimaro turned to Naruto and Gaara, his Gaia seal still active. Which will you choose? Naruto sighed and activated his cursed seal, letting off a wave of killer intent. I may have been willing to listen to you, but after you did that to my friends, I'll have to decline both of them. Kimimaro quirked an eyebrow slightly as he charged Naruto, only to be driven back by a blast of black chakra that came off Naruto's fist. Orochimaru smiled as Naruto drove Kimimaro back with a second wave of chakra. From what Naruto had heard, close combat with Kimimaro was not even remotely considerable, so he was forced to try and keep him at bay. Naruto gave a look at Gaara who nodded and held up a hand, crushing the floor tiles to make sand which he engulfed Kimimaro with. Gaara looked at him with a look that would make flowers wither. Which will you choose? To die, or obey? Kimimaro grimaced as he forced the sand off him with a wall of bone that extended from his body. Kimimaro went straight for Gaara and tried to stab him through the heart with his bone sword. Gaara didn't even flinch as the bone sword got within a meter of him and was stopped by a wall of sand. Naruto smiled as he came up behind Kimimaro and attempted to lodge a kunai into his neck. He smirked when it did connect, only to reel back as it only pierced the skin and would go no further. Kimimaro looked at Naruto before punching him into the back wall with his Gaia Seal's enhanced physical strength. Naruto got out of the crater and snarled. You asked for it, Tem. This time, I won't go easy on you. Gaara and Kimamaro's eyes widened as the lines of flames flashed and widened to cover his entire skin. His ears grew in height and became pointed at the tips, his yellow hair turned black and grew in length to cover his entire back in a mass of black spikes. He grunted as his 9 tails appeared one by one, and he opened his eyes to reveal black whites and the same red irises as the first stage. However, this time, the mass of black chakra he was expelling took form around him and his middle tail like a semi-transparent suit of black armor. He grinned ferally at Kimamaro. "Let's see what you've got." Naruto came up to a slouched standing position and brought his hand down in a vertical slashing motion, extending a black chakra arm to smash into the completely dumbfounded Kimamaro and slam him into the back wall. Naruto lowered onto all fours and charged him, letting out a snarling war cry as he slammed Kimamaro back into the dent in the wall just as he was getting up. Naruto's chakra hand grabbed Kimamaro's neck. He wasn't going to risk having his bones puncture his real hand. "Let's get one thing straight here. I'm fine with listening to your suggestions, comments and requests, but the second you start ordering me around and doing that to my teammates, you're stepping over the line. I can tell you only just got that seal, so you can't activate level 2 or even use level 1 effectively. Right now, I could destroy this whole arena if I wanted. Now, what do you choose? To die, or to obey?" Kimamaro grunted as he turned his head to the side. The hand of Naruto's chakra armor tightened, causing Kimamaro to let out a slight gurgle as his windpipe became severely blocked. "Answer me." Kimamaro looked at Naruto in disgust, more with himself than Naruto. He obeyed only Orochimaru. However, if he wanted to live, he would have to submit. He looked at Orochimaru, who just smiled at him with a momentary raise of the eyebrows, which Kimamaro took as, "Make your decision." Naruto let Kimamaro go and watched in satisfaction as Kimamaro started gasping for air. He looked back up at Naruto before lowering himself into a submissive bow. Naruto looked to Orochimaru, who nodded slightly. He turned back to Kimamaro. It was time to take him down several pegs. "It's about time you saw what you were supposed to do. From now on, we are the Sound 7, but you will be lower in the chain of command than my 4 teammates you beat." "Understood." Kimamaro nodded slightly. "Hi." Naruto deactivated his cursed seal and smirked at Kimamaro before going back to his teammates. "You guys okay?" The ones who could move nodded slightly. Naruto looked at them in amusement. "You guys aren't helping yourselves by having your cursed seals active, you know." All 4 of them deactivated them. Naruto felt Orochimaru come up next to him. "Naruto-kun, that was splendid. It is a true pity I cannot use you as a container because of the Kyuubi." Naruto sighed and shook his head. Kyuubi is both a blessing and a curse. Orochimaru smiled as he put a hand on his subordinate's shoulder. "How true." Orochimaru looked over his 7 subordinates before looking back to Naruto. "I assume you know why I called you here." Naruto nodded. "To test the Gaia Seal's power." Orochimaru smirked and nodded. "It's strong if it needed me to go to stage 2 of the Hell Seal." Orochimaru smirked as he motioned Naruto to follow him and they walked over to Kimamaro. Kimamaro looked at Naruto in well-controlled anger while Naruto stared at him. "Kimamaro, do not worry. The Gaia Seal will increase in strength with time. For now, however, it would be wise to do as Naruto-kun says." "Hi, Orochimaru-sama." Once the 4 of his injured teammates had recovered enough to walk, they shakily stood up. Naruto turned back to Orochimaru. "Orochimaru-sama, when do you want us to leave for Konoha?" Orochimaru chuckled. "As soon as possible." Naruto nodded and led his teammates out of the prison ground to begin preparing for the extraction mission.